A pop star spitting from a hotel balcony onto the crowd gathered below to see him. A rock legend diving off stage to personally confront a fan, triggering a riot that injured 60 people. A comedian sitting silently on a stool for 25 minutes, reading a book aloud rather than performing for the crowd that paid to see him. These are not internet rumors. These are documented, sourced accounts of exactly what happens when the people who made someone famous get treated like an inconvenience, rather than the reason any of it was possible in the first place. Here are They Hate Us, 25 Hollywood stars who treat their fans like dirt. Number 25, James Woods. Actor James Woods built one of the most active and combative social media presences of any major Hollywood star, using his personal account for years to engage directly with critics, fans, and strangers alike in exchanges that frequently turned hostile. Woods has been documented mocking the appearance, intelligence, and political views of ordinary users who tagged him or replied to his posts, often escalating minor disagreements into extended public exchanges, rather than simply ignoring or blocking accounts he disagreed with. Woods has defended this approach directly in interviews, arguing that he considers social media an appropriate venue for genuine, unfiltered debate, rather than a space requiring the same diplomatic restraint expected of him in traditional media appearances. Fans who initially reached out with admiration or simple questions about his career have described being surprised by the intensity of his responses when their comments touched on political subjects, a pattern that became significant enough over the years to generate its own recurring coverage in entertainment and political media alike, treating Woods' online behavior as a defining feature of his public persona rather than an occasional lapse. His account was ultimately suspended entirely from one major platform in 2021, following a post the company determined violated its policies, a suspension Woods addressed publicly with the same combative tone that had defined years of his prior online interactions, framing the ban itself as further confirmation of the persecution he had long claimed to experience from social media platforms and mainstream media coverage alike. A British rock legend whose entire public identity became built around confrontation rather than despite it defined the next entry, someone who never pretended his relationship with fans was anything other than combative from the start. Number 24, Morrissey. Morrissey, the former Smiths frontman who built a substantial solo career following the band's 1987 breakup, has developed one of the most openly contentious relationships with his own fan base of any major musician still actively touring. Years of controversial public statements on immigration, animal rights, and other political subjects have led substantial portions of his once devoted fan base to publicly abandon their support, with Morrissey frequently responding to the backlash not with conciliation, but with further, more pointed commentary, directly criticizing fans who expressed disappointment in him. Morrissey has said in interviews that he considers his fans' expectations of him to be their own responsibility rather than his, stating plainly on multiple occasions that he does not feel obligated to soften his views simply because doing so might preserve ticket sales or record purchases. That stance has led to canceled shows, dropped sponsorships, and organized boycotts from fan communities that once counted themselves among his most loyal, a dynamic Morrissey has continued to treat with open indifference rather than the kind of public damage control most artists facing similar backlash typically attempt. Longtime fans who have written publicly about their own disillusionment describe a particular kind of pain unique to Morrissey's case, noting that his lyrics had once spoken so directly and personally to outsiders and marginalized listeners that his later willingness to alienate exactly those same fans through his public statements felt like a betrayal considerably more personal than the ordinary disappointment of an artist simply falling out of favor. An even earlier example of open hostility toward an adoring audience belonged to one of rock's most influential and least approachable figures, a man who built an entire mythology around refusing to give interviewers or fans anything close to the access they wanted. Number 23. Lou Reed. Lou Reed, the former Velvet Underground frontman who went on to a decades-long solo career, developed a reputation across the music press for treating interviews and fan interactions with open, often theatrical hostility, frequently walking out of scheduled press conversations or answering questions with deliberately unhelpful, sarcastic responses. Journalists who covered Reed across multiple decades have described his interview style as an almost performative test of whether the person across from him was worth his time at all. Reed rarely rarely engaged in traditional meet-and-greet settings or extended autograph sessions, and biographers who documented his career have noted that this distance from casual fan interaction was by deliberate design rather than shyness, part of a carefully maintained public persona built around unapproachability. Reed himself addressed the reputation directly on occasion, suggesting in interviews that he considered excessive warmth toward strangers a kind of dishonesty he was simply unwilling to perform, regardless of how that choice was received by the people hoping for a warmer interaction. Music writers who conducted some of his most notoriously difficult interviews later published detailed accounts of the experience, describing sessions where Reed answered simple biographical questions with hostile one-word responses or outright refused to engage at all, treating the entire promotional exercise as beneath him, despite having agreed to the interview in the first place. A folk and rock icon whose refusal to engage with the basic expectations of celebrity fan culture became almost as famous as his actual music defined the next entry on this list. Number 22, Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan has maintained one of the most consistently guarded relationships with his own audience of any major musician in American history, generally declining autograph requests, avoiding extended meet-and-greet interactions, and rarely engaging directly with fans outside the boundaries of a ticketed performance itself. Dylan's reluctance to participate in the conventional rituals of celebrity fan engagement has been documented across more than 6 decades of his career, with biographers describing a consistent pattern of maintaining significant emotional and physical distance from audiences, even during periods of his greatest commercial success. Dylan has rarely explained this distance directly in interviews, generally treating the subject the same way he treats most questions about his personal life and motivations, with vague or deflecting answers that offer little genuine insight. Fans who have encountered Dylan in public settings over the decades have frequently described brief, largely wordless interactions, with Dylan typically declining requests for photographs or signatures, even when approached respectfully, a pattern so consistent across his career that most longtime fans have come to expect it rather than treating any individual encounter as a personal slight. Dylan's own live shows have similarly become known among longtime fans for their notable lack of stage banter or direct audience acknowledgement, with Dylan frequently performing entire sets without so much as a greeting or thank you extended toward the crowd, a stylistic choice biographers have connected directly to his broader lifelong resistance to the conventional expectations placed on performers of his stature. A far more openly confrontational Irish musician built his own reputation for hostility toward audiences directly during live performances, frequently interrupting his own shows to lecture crowds he felt were behaving disrespectfully. Number 21, Van Morrison. Van Morrison has built a decades-long reputation within the music industry for open hostility toward audiences and interviewers alike, frequently cutting interviews short, refusing to answer basic questions about his own songs, and delivering notoriously curt, sometimes outright rude responses to journalists attempting standard promotional conversations. That same combativeness has extended into his live performances, where Morrison has been documented repeatedly stopping mid-song to criticize crowd behavior he found disrespectful, including audience members using cameras or talking during quieter sections of his set. Morrison has rarely addressed his reputation for difficulty directly, generally allowing the pattern to persist across decades of interviews and live performances without significant public acknowledgement or apology. Music journalists who have covered his career extensively have described preparing specifically for uncomfortable, unproductive interviews whenever a Morrison profile was assigned, treating his difficult reputation as an accepted cost of covering one of the most influential and commercially successful artists of his generation. Concert reviewers who have covered his live shows across multiple decades have similarly noted a consistent unpredictability to his stage presence, with some performances praised as transcendent and others marred by visible irritation directed at the crowd, a duality that has become as much a part of his live reputation as the music itself. A pop icon whose entire public identity was built around mystery and control generated his own well-documented pattern of keeping fans at arm's length, refusing the basic photographic access most performers of his stature routinely granted. Number 20, Prince. Prince maintained one of the most tightly controlled public images of any major musician in American history, a control that extended directly into how he interacted with fans and journalists throughout his career. Prince rarely permitted photography during interviews or public appearances, frequently required strict, unusual conditions for any media access, and generally declined the kind of casual, unscripted fan interaction that most performers of his commercial stature engaged in regularly throughout their careers. Journalists and fans who did secure access to Prince over the decades have described interactions defined by careful, deliberate distance, with Prince frequently speaking about himself in the third person and offering minimal personal disclosure, even during formal interview settings specifically arranged for that purpose. Prince's representatives generally framed this distance as an artistic choice designed to preserve mystery around his public persona rather than genuine disdain for his audience, though the practical effect left many fans and journalists alike with the impression of a performer who considered direct personal engagement beneath the level of access his fame afforded him. Biographers who examined Prince's career following his death in 2016 have generally described the distance as a deliberate, consistent strategy rather than mere shyness, noting that even close collaborators who worked with him for years often described feeling they never fully knew him personally, a level of guardedness that extended equally to casual fans and to the musicians and producers who spent thousands of hours in the studio alongside him. An action film star whose off-screen reputation for volatility and dismissiveness toward the people around him extended well beyond his often mocked box office decline, generated its own pattern of documented complaints from fans and colleagues alike. Number 19, Steven Seagal. Steven Seagal has developed a persistent reputation across decades of public appearances and film productions for treating fans, journalists, and colleagues with open dismissiveness, frequently arriving late to scheduled meet-and-greet events or leaving early without significant engagement with the crowds who had gathered specifically to see him. Reports from fan convention organizers over the years have described difficulty securing Seagal's full cooperation for previously agreed-upon appearance terms, with several conventions noting shortened or canceled sessions that left paying attendees without the interaction they had purchased tickets specifically to receive. Seagal has rarely addressed these specific complaints directly in public interviews, generally allowing his broader public reputation for difficulty, well documented through numerous other incidents connected to his film productions and public statements, to stand without significant clarification or apology. That reputation has followed Seagal consistently enough across multiple decades that entertainment reporters covering convention culture and celebrity appearance circuits frequently cite him as a cautionary example when discussing the gap between a star's contracted appearance obligations and what fans actually receive once they arrive. Convention organizers who have booked celebrities for decades have occasionally spoken anonymously about specific logistical challenges connected to Seagal appearances, describing a pattern of last-minute demands and scheduling changes that made planning around his participation considerably more difficult than booking comparably famous action stars from the same era of Hollywood filmmaking. A pop diva whose extreme demands for isolation from ordinary public contact became as famous as her own considerable vocal talent defined the next entry on this list. Number 18, Mariah Carey. Mariah Carey has built a decades-long public reputation for extreme demands around personal comfort and isolation from direct public contact, including widely reported requirements for specific staircases to avoid ordinary walking, elaborate lighting, and temperature specifications for any space she occupies, and a general preference for minimizing unscripted interaction with fans outside of carefully controlled meet-and-greet settings. Former assistants and tour staff who have spoken about working for Carey over the years have described an operation built almost entirely around shielding her from spontaneous public contact of any kind. Carey has occasionally addressed her reputation for demanding behavior with self-aware humor in interviews, generally treating the stories as an accepted, even amusing part of her larger celebrity brand, rather than something requiring correction or apology. That framing has allowed Carey to maintain the reputation as something closer to eccentric showmanship than genuine disdain for her audience, even as the practical effect has left many fans with considerably less direct access to her than they might expect from an artist of comparable fame. in a more conventionally accessible mold. Journalists who have covered Carey's career across multiple decades have described the elaborate logistical preparations required for even brief public appearances, noting that venues and event organizers routinely receive lengthy, detailed requirement lists well in advance, a level of advanced planning that leaves essentially no room for the kind of spontaneous fan interaction that defines many other major artists' public appearances. A supermodel whose documented explosive temper became one of the most talked about aspects of her entire career generated its own pattern of incidents extending directly to the fans and members of the public who crossed her path. Number 17. Naomi Campbell. Naomi Campbell has faced a series of legal and public incidents over the course of her career connected to explosive outbursts of temper, including a well-documented 2000 confrontation resulting in an assault charge against a former assistant, and multiple subsequent incidents involving thrown objects directed at people working closely with her. While many of the most severe documented incidents involved assistants and household staff, rather than fans specifically, reports from public appearances and airport encounters over the years have described Campbell reacting with visible hostility toward members of the public who approached her for photographs without what she considered appropriate advance notice or permission. Campbell has addressed her temper directly in later interviews, acknowledging a history of behavior she has described as regrettable and attributing much of it to unresolved personal struggles she has said she worked through extensively in subsequent years. That acknowledgement has done little to fully erase the broader public reputation that built up around her name across multiple decades. One entertainment reporters have continued referencing whenever discussing patterns of celebrity volatility toward the people working closest to their daily lives. Campbell has undergone court-mandated anger management programs on more than one occasion, following legal proceedings connected to specific incidents, a detail she has referenced publicly in interviews discussing her broader personal growth, generally framing the entire chapter as one she has worked hard to move past, rather than something she considers representative of who she has become in the decades since those incidents first generated headlines. An Academy Award-winning actor whose own explosive confrontation with a hotel employee became one of the most widely covered celebrity temper incidents of the mid-2000s defined the next entry on this list. Number 16. Russell Crowe. In June 2005, Russell Crowe was arrested in New York after throwing a telephone at a hotel concierge, Nestor Estrada, striking him in the face and causing an injury requiring stitches, following a dispute over a malfunctioning phone line in Crowe's hotel room. Crowe pleaded guilty to third-degree assault the following month, avoiding jail time in exchange for a financial settlement with Estrada and a public apology, an incident that became one of the defining examples of Crowe's broader reputation for volatility toward people working in service positions around him. That incident was far from isolated within Crowe's broader public reputation, with journalists and public figures over the years describing tense, occasionally hostile encounters during interviews and public appearances, including moments where Crowe grew visibly frustrated with questions he considered invasive or poorly researched. Crowe has addressed the concierge incident directly in later interviews with a degree of self-aware regret, generally describing it as an embarrassing lapse in judgment rather than characteristic of how he wanted to be remembered, even as the incident remained one of the most frequently referenced examples of celebrity temper directed at ordinary working people rather than fellow public figures. Crowe has said in subsequent interviews that the incident forced him to reckon publicly with a temper he had previously managed largely in private, describing the years immediately following the arrest as a period during which he made a conscious, sustained effort to handle frustration differently in public settings, an effort entertainment reporters covering his career in the 2 decades since have generally acknowledged as at least partially successful given the relative scarcity of comparable incidents in his more recent public life. An Academy Award-winning actor whose confrontations with photographers and members of the public became a defining and recurring feature of his decades-long career generated an even more extensive documented pattern of volatility. Number 15. Sean Penn. Sean Penn has faced numerous documented confrontations with photographers and members of the public throughout his career, including a widely covered 1987 incident in which he was arrested and later served jail time connected to an altercation with a photographer on a film set, and a separate 2009 confrontation captured by paparazzi outside a Los Angeles nightclub. Penn's reputation for volatility toward photographers and, by extension, the broader celebrity-watching public became significant enough that entertainment reporters frequently referenced his history whenever covering similar incidents involving other stars. Penn has spoken about his own temper in later interviews with a measure of reflection, acknowledging that his younger self reacted to intense public scrutiny with considerably less restraint than he believes he would exercise given the same circumstances later in his career and life. That acknowledgement has not fully erased the broader reputation that followed him across multiple decades, one that continued resurfacing whenever new incidents involving other volatile celebrities and photographers made headlines, with Penn's name frequently cited as an earlier example of the same underlying dynamic. Colleagues who worked alongside Penn during the years his reputation for volatility was at its peak have generally described a complicated figure capable of genuine warmth and generosity toward people he trusted, while remaining deeply resistant to what he perceived as intrusive or disrespectful attention from strangers, a distinction that has done little to soften the broader public narrative that formed around his name during those same years. A rapper and entrepreneur whose social media mockery of ordinary fans became a defining, almost gleeful feature of his online persona, defined a very different kind of hostility, one conducted entirely through a keyboard rather than in person. Number 14. 50 Cent. Rapper and entrepreneur 50 Cent has built one of the most consistently combative social media presences of any major hip-hop figure, frequently reposting photos and comments from fans and critics alike, accompanied by mocking captions directed at their appearance, grammar, or opinions. The pattern became significant enough over the years that entertainment and hip-hop specific media outlets began covering individual instances as standalone stories, treating 50 Cent's willingness to publicly ridicule ordinary social media users as a defining, almost branded feature of his online presence, rather than an occasional lapse in judgment. 50 Cent has defended the practice directly in interviews, generally framing it as harmless entertainment rather than genuine cruelty, and noting that he considers anyone who publicly comments on his posts to have implicitly accepted the possibility of a public response in return. Fans who found themselves on the receiving end of this treatment have described mixed reactions, with some treating the attention, however mocking, as a genuinely exciting brush with fame, while others have described the experience as considerably more upsetting than they anticipated when they first left a comment expecting no response at all. Entertainment reporters covering hip-hop's relationship with social media have noted that 50 Cent's approach predates much of the current era's more casual celebrity fan online banter, positioning him as something of an early architect of the specific mocking style that numerous other public figures have since adopted in their own online interactions with fans and critics alike. A legacy he has said he views with genuine pride rather than any regret about the individuals who found themselves unexpectedly on the receiving end of his attention over the years. A rapper whose years-long pattern of public feuds with fans on social media escalated into one of hip-hop's most consistently combative online personas defined the next entry. Number 13. Azealia Banks. Rapper Azealia Banks has built a reputation over more than a decade in the public eye for engaging directly and often viciously with fans and critics on social media, frequently escalating minor criticism into extended, insult-heavy exchanges that have generated their own dedicated coverage across entertainment and hip-hop media outlets. Banks has been documented blocking, mocking, and publicly criticizing fans who raised even mild concerns about her music or public statements, treating nearly any form of criticism as deserving of a forceful, personal response rather than simple disagreement. Banks has rarely apologized for this pattern in subsequent interviews, generally defending her right to respond to critics however she sees fit and framing her online combativeness as an extension of the same unfiltered honesty she has said defines her artistic identity more broadly. That consistency has made her one of the most frequently cited examples within hip-hop journalism of an artist whose relationship with even her own most dedicated supporters has remained genuinely adversarial rather than warm, a dynamic Banks herself has shown little sustained interest in softening. Across the years her public career has continued. Music journalists who have covered her career extensively have noted that the sheer volume and consistency of these online confrontations, sustained across more than a decade and multiple different social media platforms, as each one banned her in turn, sets her apart even from other artists on this list, known for combative online behavior. A comedian whose willingness to simply stop performing rather than continue for an audience he found disrespectful generated one of the most widely covered walk-off incidents in modern stand-up comedy history. Number 12. Dave Chappelle. In August 2013, Dave Chappelle was headlining the Oddball Comedy and Curiosity Festival at the Comcast Theater in Hartford, Connecticut, when persistent heckling from portions of the audience led him to abandon his planned set almost entirely. Rather than continuing to perform, Chappelle sat silently on a stool at center stage for roughly 25 minutes, at points reading passages aloud from a book he had brought with him, smoking, and periodically addressing the crowd directly with pointed, sarcastic commentary about their behavior, fulfilling his contractually required stage time without delivering anything resembling his planned material. The incident generated immediate, extensive media coverage, with some observers defending Chappelle's decision as a reasonable response to a genuinely disrespectful audience, while others characterized his reaction as an overreaction that unfairly punished the majority of attendees who had paid for a full performance, regardless of a smaller group's disruptive behavior. Fans in attendance offered sharply divided accounts afterward, with some describing the crowd as genuinely rowdy and disrespectful throughout the earlier portion of the show, while others insisted Chappelle had been met with enthusiastic cheering rather than hostility before abruptly deciding to disengage from the performance entirely. Chappelle addressed the incident directly during a subsequent performance in Chicago days later, telling the crowd that some of the Hartford audience had earned his forgiveness while others had not, a comment that continued fueling debate over exactly how much responsibility a performer bears for managing a difficult crowd versus how much blame belongs to the audience itself. The Hartford incident remained one of the most frequently referenced examples in entertainment journalism of a performer choosing open, public confrontation over simply completing a contracted performance despite audience difficulty. A pattern Chappelle would go on to repeat in later years whenever he encountered phones or recording devices at his shows, a policy he has enforced strictly at nearly every performance since. A singer whose documented pattern of altercations with photographers and reported confrontations near nightclubs generated its own recurring coverage across entertainment media outlets defined the next entry on this list. Number 11. Chris Brown. Chris Brown has faced numerous reported altercations with photographers and members of the public outside nightclubs and other public venues throughout his career. Incidents that entertainment outlets including TMZ have covered extensively over more than a decade, generally describing tense confrontations that occasionally escalated into physical contact between Brown's security team and photographers attempting to capture images of him in public. While many of these reported incidents involved paparazzi specifically, rather than fans in the traditional sense, the pattern contributed to a broader public perception of Brown as someone whose public appearances carried a persistent, unpredictable risk of confrontation for anyone attempting to approach or photograph him. Brown has rarely addressed these specific incidents in significant detail during interviews, generally allowing his representatives to manage public responses to individual reports as they arose rather than offering extended personal commentary. The cumulative effect of years of similar reported incidents has left Brown with a public reputation for volatility in public settings that has followed him consistently across entertainment coverage, regardless of how any individual incident was ultimately resolved or characterized by those directly involved. Concert promoters and venue security teams who have worked with Brown on tour have occasionally described heightened precautions taken specifically around meet-and-greet logistics for his shows, a level of advanced planning some industry observers have connected directly to the accumulated pattern of reported public confrontations across his career. That same volatility toward the public looks almost restrained compared to the next entry, whose own well-documented reputation for blunt, unfiltered treatment of admirers has followed him across decades of interviews and public appearances. Number 10. Liam Gallagher. Liam Gallagher built his reputation as the frontman of Oasis largely around a combative, unfiltered public persona that extended well beyond his conflicts with his own brother and bandmate, Noel Gallagher. Disputes that famously contributed to the band's original breakup in 2009. Fans who have attended his autograph sessions and public appearances over the years have described encounters where Gallagher openly mocked their appearance or dismissed their attempts at conversation, with one widely circulated account describing him laughing at a fan's outfit and calling it tragic before walking away without further interaction, leaving the fan with a story they had clearly not expected to come away with after waiting to meet someone they admired. Gallagher has never denied cultivating a deliberately blunt, take-it-or-leave-it public persona, and has said in interviews over the years that he sees little reason to perform warmth he does not genuinely feel in the moment, regardless of who is standing in front of him or how much they might have paid to be there. That attitude has followed him consistently enough across decades of interviews, autograph lines, and public appearances that it has become as closely associated with his public identity as the music itself, treated by longtime fans less as an occasional bad day and more as a defining, unapologetic character trait. He has never shown much interest in softening, even during the band's highly publicized 2025 reunion tour, when renewed public attention brought fresh scrutiny to his long-standing reputation for blunt, occasionally cutting remarks toward the very audiences filling arenas to see the reformed lineup perform. Music journalists covering that reunion tour specifically noted how little Gallagher's public demeanor toward fans had softened in the 16 years since the band's original breakup, treating the consistency itself as evidence that the abrasiveness reflected a genuine, settled personality trait rather than a passing phase tied to any particular period of his career. A very different kind of dismissiveness defined the next entry, this one playing out not through blunt insults during a brief encounter, but through a pattern of publicly correcting and belittling the very people who had built an entire online community around supporting her career. Number 9, Doja Cat. Doja Cat built a large, devoted fan community online in the years following her early viral success, with fans adopting the nickname Kittens to describe themselves as a group, a term of endearment that spread widely across social media platforms and became closely associated with her broader public brand. In 2023, amid a period of public tension surrounding her personal life, Doja Cat publicly criticized the nickname directly on social media, writing that her fans did not name themselves that and that anyone calling themselves a kitten needed to get off their phone and get a job to help their parents around the house. A comment that struck many longtime supporters as an unusually harsh rejection of a nickname they had embraced for years, without any prior objection from the artist herself. The comments drew immediate backlash from fans who felt blindsided by having a term of affection they had chosen for themselves publicly mocked by the artist it was meant to celebrate, with many pointing out that the nickname had circulated for years without any indication Doja Cat found it objectionable. The criticism escalated further after Doja Cat was seen blocking and arguing online with fans who had raised concerns about her association with a controversial musician facing serious public allegations, with those exchanges drawing additional scrutiny given the seriousness of the underlying allegations involved and the pointed nature of her responses to fans simply expressing concern. Doja Cat has continued to address her fan base with a similarly blunt, unfiltered tone in the years since, generally showing little interest in softening her public commentary, even when it draws significant backlash from the same community that helped build her career in the first place. A television personality whose entire public persona was built around approachability generated a very different kind of backlash. Once reports began circulating that her off-camera treatment of fans and service staff bore little resemblance to the warmth she projected on screen, a gap that became impossible to ignore once enough individual accounts had accumulated across her decades in the public eye. Number 8. Christina Aguilera. Christina Aguilera built a reputation during her tenure as a judge on the reality singing competition, the voice for delivering blunt, occasionally condescending critiques to contestants, an approach some viewers found entertaining, but others described as needlessly harsh given the emotional stakes for amateur singers appearing on a national broadcast. That same reputation extended beyond the show itself, with multiple reports over the years describing Aguilera as unwilling to sign autographs or engage with fans during public appearances, promotional events, and award show arrivals where other stars of comparable fame routinely stopped to interact with waiting crowds. Service industry workers and fans who have shared accounts of encounters with Aguilera have generally described a pattern of curt, dismissive interactions rather than any single explosive incident, painting a picture of an artist who has drawn a firm line between her public performing persona and her willingness to engage with admirers outside of a formal, ticketed setting. Aguilera has rarely addressed these characterizations directly in interviews, generally allowing the reputation to persist without significant public pushback, a contrast to some other artists on this list who have at least acknowledged specific incidents when confronted about them. Entertainment reporters covering her career across more than 2 decades have noted the consistency of this particular reputation, even as nearly every other aspect of her public image, from her musical style to her personal life, has shifted dramatically across different eras of her career. A veteran comedic actor whose career spans multiple decades of beloved film roles has built an entirely different kind of reputation, one defined less by a single controversy and more by a consistent pattern of treating admirers with open, sarcastic contempt. Number 7. Chevy Chase. Chevy Chase became one of the defining comedic film stars of the late 1970s and 1980s, first through his work on Saturday Night Live, where he was an original cast member and one of the show's earliest breakout stars, and later through franchises including National Lampoon's Vacation and Fletch. Behind that beloved on-screen persona, fans who have encountered Chase during autograph sessions and public appearances over the years have repeatedly described sarcastic, dismissive remarks delivered with little apparent concern for how they landed, with one fan account describing Chase mocking their visible excitement at meeting him, joking aloud that the interaction meant very little to him personally. Former colleagues who have worked alongside Chase on film and television productions have echoed similar accounts of condescending humor directed at crew members and support staff, suggesting the pattern extended well beyond isolated encounters with fans specifically and into his general working relationships throughout much of his career. Chase's reputation for difficult, occasionally hostile behavior became significant enough within the industry that it has been cited repeatedly in retrospective coverage of his career, including reporting connected to his later tenure on the television series Community, where cast and crew members separately described friction that eventually contributed to his early departure from the show. That broader reputation stands in sharp contrast to the warm, self-deprecating characters that made him famous in the first place, and that many fans still associate closely with his public image today, a gap between performance and personality that has followed Chase across nearly 5 decades in the entertainment industry, one he has occasionally addressed with a measure of self-aware humor in later interviews without ever fully disavowing the underlying pattern itself. A pop star known for one of music's most tightly managed and beloved public images generated her own controversy when hidden security footage captured exactly how she treated ordinary people when she assumed no cameras were watching. Number 6. Ariana Grande. In July 2015, security footage from a donut shop in Lake Elsinore, California, captured Ariana Grande licking unpurchased donuts on display and reacting with visible disgust when a shop employee brought out a fresh tray, declaring loudly that she hated Americans and hated America, comments that were directed toward her companion at the time, but were captured clearly by the shop's own surveillance camera positioned behind the counter. The footage, obtained and published by TMZ, spread rapidly online, drawing sharp criticism from fans and casual observers alike, who felt the moment revealed a genuine contempt for ordinary people that clashed sharply with Grande's carefully cultivated, relatable public image at the time. Grande issued 2 separate public apologies in the days following the video's release, describing her comments as taken out of context and rooted in frustration over American eating habits, rather than any genuine disdain for the country or its people, though the explanation did little to fully quiet the backlash at the time, given how clearly the comments had been captured on camera. Local health officials in Riverside County separately investigated the shop itself after the video surfaced, ultimately lowering its health grade for having left the donuts exposed and unprotected. Separately, longtime horror host Elvira later described her own encounter with Grande backstage at an event, recalling that she had happily taken photos and signed autographs for every member of Grande's entourage, friends and relatives included, only for Grande herself to decline a photo when Elvira asked for one in return, telling her plainly that she did not really do that kind of thing. Grande posted a public apology in response once the story circulated online years later, acknowledging the exchange had not reflected well on her. Grande's team has generally maintained, in the years since, that the donut shop incident represented an isolated lapse in judgment rather than a genuine reflection of how she views her fans more broadly, pointing to her continued engagement with supporters through social media and meet-and-greet events as evidence of a warmer overall relationship with the public than either the viral video or the Elvira anecdote might individually suggest. An actor famous for his complete physical transformations between roles built a very different kind of reputation off-screen. This one described in explicit detail by someone who worked directly for him during the years his career reached its commercial peak. Number 5. Christian Bale. Christian Bale's former publicist, Harrison Chung, published a memoir titled Christian Bale, The Inside Story of the Darkest Batman, detailing his years working alongside the actor, including a specific and repeated pattern of behavior toward young fans seeking autographs at public appearances and film premieres. According to Chung's account, Bale would lecture children requesting his signature about being rude and intrusive, continuing the lecture until the children were reduced to tears and had to be pulled away from the table by embarrassed parents who had often brought them specifically for what they assumed would be an exciting, positive memory. Chung's book, published years after his professional relationship with Bale ended, drew significant attention, specifically because it came from someone who had worked in close proximity to the actor for an extended period, rather than a single fan recounting one isolated bad experience from a distance. Chung's account described the behavior as a recurring pattern rather than an occasional lapse, suggesting Bale held genuine, consistent views about what he considered appropriate boundaries between a public figure and admirers seeking his time. Bale's representatives have not offered a detailed public rebuttal to the specific claims in Chung's account, and the actor's broader public reputation for intensity and difficulty on set, well documented through other incidents over the course of his career, including a widely circulated leaked audio recording of an on-set outburst, has generally been treated by entertainment reporters as consistent with the picture Chung's book paints of his off-camera demeanor toward the public. Fan forums and celebrity encounter communities online have since cited Chung's account frequently whenever Bale's public reputation comes up in discussion, treating it as one of the more credible, insider-sourced pieces of evidence available regarding how the actor genuinely regards the fans whose ticket purchases have helped make him one of the more consistently employed leading men of his generation. A hip-hop artist whose career has been defined as much by public controversy as by his music, built a documented pattern of hostility toward both fans and the photographers who follow them, escalating well beyond the kind of curt autograph refusals described earlier on this list into confrontations that occasionally required intervention from bystanders and security personnel alike. Number 4. Kanye West. Kanye West has built a reputation over the course of his career for volatile public interactions, extending beyond his well-documented conflicts with fellow musicians and repeated controversial public statements. Reports spanning multiple years have described heated altercations between West and paparazzi photographers, including physical confrontations that occasionally required intervention from bystanders or security, along with accounts of West publicly criticizing his own fans during concerts and other public appearances when their behavior failed to meet his expectations for how an audience should conduct itself. Unlike some other entries on this list, built around a single, clearly documented incident with a specific date and location, West's reputation for hostility toward the public has developed cumulatively across years of reported confrontations, making it difficult to point to any one moment as definitive while still leaving a consistent overall pattern recognized broadly across entertainment coverage of his career spanning more than a decade. West has rarely addressed these specific characterizations directly, generally allowing his broader public persona, built around unfiltered, often confrontational commentary across nearly every aspect of his public life, to stand largely unchallenged rather than offering detailed responses to individual accounts from fans or photographers. Fans who have attended his concerts and listening events have occasionally shared accounts of West halting performances entirely to address perceived disrespect from the crowd, sometimes for extended stretches of time, a habit that has left some audiences feeling as though the show itself had become secondary to whatever grievance had captured his attention in that particular moment. A Latin trap superstar's reaction to an unwanted camera phone generated one of the most widely viewed and hotly debated celebrity fan confrontations of recent years, captured in real time and immediately defended by the artist himself rather than walked back. A response that stood in sharp contrast to the more typical pattern of quiet apology most stars reach for once a viral confrontation begins circulating online. Number 3. Bad Bunny. In early 2023, a video went viral showing Bad Bunny smiling and appearing friendly toward a fan who approached him with her phone raised to record the encounter, before he suddenly reached out, grabbed the phone from her hand, and threw it, all captured on a separate camera that quickly circulated across social media platforms within hours of the original encounter. The clip spread rapidly across social media, sparking widespread debate over whether the reaction constituted a legitimate response to an invasive fan encounter or a genuinely disproportionate act of aggression towards someone who had simply wanted a video of meeting one of the biggest recording artists in the world. Rather than apologizing or clarifying the incident quietly, Bad Bunny addressed the controversy directly and unapologetically on social media, stating that anyone who approached him to say hello or share something with him would always receive his attention and respect, but that anyone who instead put a phone directly in his face would be treated, in his words, as exactly the lack of respect that gesture represented. The statement drew a mixed reaction, with some fans and commentators defending his right to set boundaries around unsolicited filming given the constant scrutiny major stars face in public, while others argued that physically grabbing and throwing another person's property crossed a clear line regardless of how the interaction began. Entertainment commentators noted at the time that the episode highlighted a broader tension increasingly common among major stars navigating an era where nearly every public appearance risks being filmed and uploaded within minutes, keeping the debate over the incident active in entertainment coverage for weeks after the original video surfaced. A pop star whose spitting incidents became so frequent during a single stretch of his career that they developed into their own recurring news story generated years of documented hostility toward the very crowds that gathered specifically to see him, a pattern so consistent that entertainment outlets eventually stopped treating each new incident as a standalone story and began covering it instead as an ongoing, evolving saga. Number 2. Justin Bieber. During his 2013 Believe tour, Justin Bieber was photographed standing on the balcony of Toronto's Hazelton Hotel, spitting saliva down onto a crowd of fans who had gathered below specifically hoping to catch a glimpse of him, an audience that had assembled outside the hotel for hours in anticipation of exactly this kind of brief encounter with the star. The images, first published by TMZ, showed Bieber and a group of friends laughing together immediately afterward, having spent the earlier part of the same day posting an appreciative Instagram video of the same crowd, captioning it a message calling them the best fans in the world. The balcony incident was not an isolated event, and entertainment reporters covering Bieber's career at the time noted that it represented at least the fourth spitting-related controversy connected to him within roughly the same calendar year alone. That same year, Bieber was separately accused of spitting on an Ohio radio DJ during a confrontation at a nightclub after reportedly believing his photograph was being taken without permission, spitting on a neighbor during an unrelated dispute over his driving habits in their gated community, and was accused by a woman at a gym of similar behavior, establishing enough of a pattern that entertainment outlets began referring to it as a recurring controversy specifically tied to his name. A Toronto municipal bylaw explicitly prohibits spitting in public spaces, including sidewalks and building entrances, and Toronto police confirmed at the time that the act could technically constitute assault under Canadian law, depending on the circumstances, though no charges were ultimately filed in connection with the balcony incident specifically. The gap between the affectionate caption Bieber had posted about his fans hours earlier and the video capturing him spitting down at the same crowd became one of the most widely cited examples that year of a celebrity's public messaging directly contradicted by his own recorded behavior toward the people who had made him famous, a contrast that continued circulating in retrospective coverage of his career for years afterward. Entertainment reporters who revisited the story in subsequent years frequently noted how directly the balcony images undercut the wholesome, grateful public image Bieber's management team had otherwise worked carefully to maintain during that specific stretch of his career, making the contradiction considerably harder to spin than a more ambiguous controversy might have been. Nothing on this list, however, comes close to the scale of consequences triggered by the final entry, a rock frontman whose decades-long pattern of hostility toward concert-goers eventually spiraled into a genuine riot that left dozens of people injured. Number 1. Axl Rose, Guns N' Roses frontman. Axl Rose has built one of the most extensively documented reputations in music history for volatile, unpredictable treatment of the audiences who pay to see him perform, a reputation stretching back to the band's earliest tours in the late 1980s. During a July 1991 concert at Riverport Amphitheater near St. Louis, Rose spotted a fan, Bill Stevenson, recording video from the crowd during the song Rocket Queen. Despite cameras being prohibited without prior artist approval, a policy strictly enforced at Guns N' Roses shows during that era. Rose shouted at security to remove the fan and confiscate the camera, and when the response did not come quickly enough to satisfy him, Rose dove directly off the stage and into the audience himself to confront Stevenson personally, an extraordinary act for a headlining performer that immediately halted the show and triggered a full-scale riot once the band subsequently left the stage entirely rather than returning to finish the set. The resulting chaos left more than 60 people injured and caused extensive damage to the venue, becoming one of the most infamous incidents in modern concert history, and resulting in an arrest warrant issued for Rose himself on charges connected to the disturbance, a warrant that led to Rose eventually reaching a plea agreement years later. That incident proved to be far from an isolated one. Rose has walked off stage entirely on numerous documented occasions over subsequent decades whenever fans threw objects toward the stage, including a widely covered 2010 show in Dublin, where the band abandoned the performance after being struck by thrown bottles following nearly an hour of the crowd waiting through a late start, leaving thousands of ticket holders without the show they had already paid considerable money to attend. Concert promoters at that Dublin venue publicly criticized Rose afterward for what they described as a long history of arriving late to his own shows, a pattern that had repeatedly strained his relationship with paying audiences well before that particular night's bottles were ever thrown. As recently as 2022, Rose was forced to permanently discontinue a decades-long tradition of tossing his microphone into the crowd at the end of shows after a woman in Adelaide, Australia, claimed she was struck in the face by the microphone and seriously injured, telling local media she believed the impact could have caused far more serious harm had the trajectory been only slightly different. Rose addressed the incident directly in a public statement, acknowledging the tradition could no longer continue safely, writing that while most fans understood and looked forward to catching the tossed microphone as a treasured piece of memorabilia, the risk of genuine injury meant the ritual needed to end, regardless of how many years it had already been a signature part of the band's live shows. Across more than 3 decades, Rose's relationship with the audiences who built his career has remained defined by exactly the same volatility that first triggered a riot outside St. Louis back in 1991, a pattern of behavior toward fans that has proven remarkably consistent across an otherwise constantly evolving lineup and career. Music historians examining Rose's decades-long career have frequently pointed to the St. Louis riot as a genuine turning point in how the broader music industry began thinking about artist accountability toward paying audiences, with several venues afterward implementing stricter contractual protections specifically designed to prevent similar incidents from ever occurring again. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more history documentaries.